try to do without them. Well, I'll try to do without them, said the king. But he couldn't. Day after day, the king grew sadder and sadder. He'd sit for long hours just drumming his fingers against the edge of his throne. His commands to the patrol cats grew feeble and weak. The cats, well, they noticed and they didn't obey. Day after day, the cats grew lazier and lazier. They'd sleep for long hours and barely even bothered to chase away the lizards. So the lizards, day after day, grew bolder and bolder. They'd swoop low over the townsfolk, and the townsfolk grew more and more scared. Housewives couldn't keep their minds on their houses. Bootmakers couldn't keep their minds on their boots. Cart drivers couldn't keep their minds on their carts. They'd stop in the middle of the street to talk to one another. Have you seen the lizards? Where are the cats? Everywhere they shouldn't be, and mostly fast asleep. Something must be wrong with the king. Yes, something must. Only Eric, the page boy, knew what was wrong with the king, and night after night he tossed and he turned thinking about it. Finally one night he decided he could stand it no longer. Droon or no droon, he was going to tell the king. So the very next morning he got up early and ran to the castle as fast as he could. He arrived, red-faced and out of breath. He could see the king sitting down in the garden, but before he could reach him, who should show up but Lord Droon? "You impudent boy," said Lord Droon. "I told you not to come back." "I must see the king," said Eric, as bravely as he could. "You can't," said Lord Droon. Then he started to smile, the kind of smile that he got when he was about to lie. "Your face," he said. "Something's wrong with your face." "It's the measles," said Lord Droon. "Guards, take him away." "I have not got the measles," said Eric. But it was too late. The guards were already dragging him off. In no time at all, they had him locked in a small house on the edge of town with a sign that said measles over the doorway. The guards stood in front of the doorway with their spears crossed. Eric thought and he paced, and he paced and he thought. He had to get out. He had to get to the king. But how? Finally, he got an idea. Quickly, he slipped off his belt and made a lasso. With as much precision as he could, he tossed it down over the spears of the guards and tied them together. "Look, guards," he said, "your spears are tied together." Now, if the guards had simply dropped their spears, they could have caught Eric in a second. But instead, they started to tug and to pull and to argue with one another. And so Eric slipped out the window and ran away. He ran as fast as he could to the place where he buried the stilts, and he started to dig. As the lizard swooped over him, he threw clods of dirt at them. Then he saw the stilts and pulled them free. He started to head back towards the palace. As he came around the corner, he stopped. His feet were wet. He tasted the water. Seawater. One dike tree might already be eaten clean through. He had to get to the king, but just then he heard the voice of Lord Droon. "You stupid guards, letting a small boy escape. Search every street, search every house," Lord Droon was saying. There wasn't time to run. Eric ducked into the nearest shop. Just then the guards came around the corner. "Search that tailor's shop first," Lord Droon told them. The guards went to the door, but just before they reached the doorknob, the door opened and a strange-looking, tall man came out. He was wearing a long robe and a hat that was pulled down low over his eyes. "Those eyes," said Lord Droon. "Have I seen you before?" "Are you looking for a small boy?" said the strange-looking tall man. "Which way?" asked the guards. And Eric pointed towards the sea. The guards ran off with Droon right behind them. Eric ran in disguise as fast as he could, straight to the castle. The streets were deserted. All the townsfolk were hiding in their houses, quivering with fear because of the lizards. As he came to the garden, he saw the king sitting there. His robe was drabby and disheveled. His crown was unpolished, and his face was more sad than Eric had ever seen it. "Your Majesty," said Eric. "And what might you want?" said the king. "It's Eric," said Eric, and he threw off his disguise. Down from the stilts leapt Eric the page boy. Up to the stilts leapt Bertram the king. "Patrol cats!" he bellowed. It was the loudest command ever heard in all of Bid. It seemed to echo up from the ground and into his chest and then out into the air. From all across the kingdom, everywhere that they'd fallen asleep or were napping, the cats leapt to attention. "Day cats to the left," said the king. "Night cats to the right. Charge!" The cats charged at the lizards, and the lizards had to leave off their pecking. Fur and feathers flew fast and faster. The sea churned, and there was such a great sound that it was heard all the way in Salisalu, over 500 miles away. In only 15 minutes, the kingdom was saved. The townsfolk came out of their houses and cheered in the streets. As for Lord Droom, the king punished him in a way most fitting. Lord Droom was sent to live by himself on the far edge of town, in the house that said measles over the door, and guarded by 2 patrol cats. And he was only ever allowed to eat lizards from that day forward. Stewed lizards for breakfast, fried lizards for lunch, and every other Tuesday they served him lizard hash. As for Eric the page boy, the king rewarded him in a way most fitting. The king commissioned the royal carpenter to make a second pair of stilts, and from then on, every afternoon at 5, the king and Eric ran on stilts together. And when they worked, they really worked. But when they played, they really played. And the patrol cats kept the lizards away from the dike trees, and the dike trees kept the waters out of the land. But I'm not fluent in sign language, so if you are fluent in sign language, please forgive me, for it won't be perfect. This story is called Old Turtle. Long, long ago, and yet also not so long ago, when all of the animals and stones and winds and waters and trees and birds and fish, and all of the beings on the earth could speak and understand one another, there began an argument. It began softly at first, soft as the first breeze who whispered, "He is a great wind, who is never still." Soft as the stones who answered, "He is a great rock, who never moves." Gentle as the mountains who rumbled, "God is a snowy peak, high above the clouds." And the fish in the sea who said, "God is a swimmer in the depths of the deep blue sea." "No," said the star, "God is a twinkling and a shining far, far away." "No," said the ant, "God is a scent and a sound and a feeling who is very, very close." "God," said the antelope, "is a runner, swift and free, who loves to leap and race with the wind." "God is the life of the world," said the willow. "No, God is like the shining sun, high above all things," said the sky. "God is a river who runs through the very heart of things," thundered the waterfall. "God is a hunter," roared the lion. "God is gentle," chirped the robin. "God is powerful," growled the bear. And the argument grew louder and louder and louder until, stop. A new voice spoke. The voice rumbled loudly like thunder, and it whispered softly like butterfly sneezes. The voice seemed to come from Well, the voice seemed to come from Old Turtle. Old Turtle hardly ever said anything at all, and certainly never argued about God. But now, Old Turtle began to speak. God is indeed deep, she told the fish in the sea, and much higher than high, she told the mountains. God is swift and free as the wind, and still and solid as a great stone, she told the breeze and the stones. God is the life of the world, Turtle said to the willow, always close by, yet beyond the furthest twinkling lights, she told the ant and the star. God is gentle and powerful, above all things and within all things. God is all that we dream of and all that we seek, all that we hope for and all that we can find. God is. Old Turtle had never said so much before, and all the beings were surprised and became very quiet. But Old Turtle still had one more thing to say. There will soon be a new family of beings on the earth, and they will be strange and wonderful. They will be reminders of all that God is. They will come in many different colors, with different faces and different ways of speaking. Their thoughts will soar to the stars, but their feet will walk on the earth. They will possess many powers. They will be strong, yet tender. They will be a message of love from God to the earth, and a prayer from the earth back to God. And the people came, but the people forgot. They forgot that they were a message of love and a prayer from the earth. And the people began to argue about who knew God and who didn't, and about where God was and was not, and about whether God was or was not. And often the people misused their powers to hurt one another and even to kill one another. And they hurt the earth until even the forests began to die, and the rivers, and the birds, and the animals, and the earth itself, because the people could not remember who they were or where God was. Until one day there came a voice, like the rumbling of thunder, yet as soft as butterfly stings. Please stop. The voice seemed to come from the mountain, who rumbled, sometimes I see God swimming in the depths of the deep blue sea. And from the oceans, who said God is often among the snow-capped peaks reflecting the sun. It came from the breeze, who whispered, I feel God's presence when I dance among the stones. And from the stones, who said, I feel God's when the wind blows by. And the stars declared, God is very close. And the island added, His love touches everything. After a long, lonesome, and scary time, the people listened and began to hear and to see God in one another and in the beauty of all the earth. And Old Turtle smiled, and so did God.
Up next is my sister, Her name is Sarah. She's a storyteller, and I like to brag about her because I have never met anyone that fits so many words in their brain at one time. I don't know how she does it. And she also tells the stories amazingly well, so I'm going to let her do that.
This morning, I got up on my horse and I went out for a ride, and some wild outlaws chased me, and they shot me in the side. So, I crawled into a wildcat's cave to find a place to hide, but some bandits found me sleeping there, and soon they had me tied to a pole and built a fire under me. I almost cried, but a merman came and cut me loose. He begged me to be his bride, so I said I'd come back Wednesday. But I must admit, I lied, and I ran into a jungle swamp, but I forgot my guide, and I fell into some quicksand, and no matter how I tried, I couldn't get loose until I met a water snake named Clyde. He pulled me to some cannibals who planned to have me fried, but an eagle came and swooped me up, and through the air we fly. But he dropped me in a boiling lake, 1,000 miles wide. And you'll never guess what I did then. I died. That was True Story by Shel Silverstein. My next story is by another familiar author. It's a story by Dr. Seuss. Naturally, the king never wore his stilts during business hours. When the king worked, he really worked, and the stilts stood forgotten in the tall silk closet in the castle's front hallway. There was so much work to be done in the kingdom of Finn that the king got up every morning at 5. Long before the townspeople were awake, the king was splashing about in his bath. It was right there, as a matter of fact, that his day's work began. With his left hand he scrubbed with his royal scrub brush, but his right hand he always kept dry for signing royal proclamations and papers of state. Eric, his page boy, brought these in on a large silver platter, while Lord Droon held them up one by one over the water for his majesty to sign. Sign here, sign there, Lord Droon would say, and hurry, sire, hurry. There are hundreds more to come. It was just the same at breakfast. With his left hand, the king cut and buttered his toast, but with his right hand, he continued to sign papers of state and royal decrees. By 7 every morning, the king had gotten more work done than most kings get done in a month. He had to get all this work done by 7, because that was the hour when his big work commenced, the most important work in all of Finn. That was the work of caring for the mighty dike trees that surrounded the kingdom on 3 sides. You see, the kingdom was a low one, and the sea was a high one, and only the gnarled roots of the dike trees growing side by side along the shore kept the water from pouring into the kingdom. But to keep these trees strong and healthy was not an easy task. They were spicier than pine trees and very tasty to a certain kind of bird. Nizzards, they were called by the people of Finn. And the nizzards would swoop down just waiting for their opportunity to peck. If they were not kept at bay, the nizzards quickly would have destroyed each and every dike tree. But King Bertram did not allow this to happen. He had found and trained the smartest, strongest cats in all of the kingdom to chase the nizzards away. They were called patrol cats, and they wore badges that said PC. Everything in Finn depends on our patrol cats, the king would say. They're more important than our army and our navy, even our fire department. Because without the patrol cats, there would be nothing to keep the nizzards away from the dike trees. And without the dike trees, there would be nothing to keep the ocean out of the land. There was 1,000 cats in all. They divided up the work. 500 were the day cats, and 500 were the night cats. At 7 every morning came the changing of the cat guard. A trumpet sounded, and the king would leave off his breakfast and mount his horse for the daily review. Fresh, brisk, and well-fed, the day cats marched off to take up their posts by the sea, while tired, muddy, and hungry, the night cats marched home for their 12 hours rest. There was rest for the cats, but none for the king. Every moment of his morning was taken up with making sure that the cats were properly cared for. The cat kitchen was even larger and grander than the king's, and only the finest, freshest fish were served to them. Each cat had to be brushed, their whiskers just so. That was the morning, and then all afternoon, both in winter and summer, every root of every dike tree the king inspected every day. But finally, at 5 o'clock, his big work was finished. That was the moment that King Bertram lived for, because when he worked, he really worked. But when he played, he really played. At 5 o'clock, he would turn to his page boy and say, "Quick, Eric, the stilts," and they would run through the castle to the tall stilt closet in the front hallway. Out came the stilts, up leapt the king, and then he would run through the corridors, cross the garden, out across the terrace. The people looked on from the walls, and they just loved it. A grown-up king on stilts, they'd say, well, it's a little strange, but he's a good king, and he does his work well. If he wants to have some fun, let him have it. But there was one man in Bin who didn't like fun. He didn't like games, and he didn't like laughter. That man was a scowler. His name was Lord Droon. "Laughing spoils the shape of the face," he would say. "The lines at the corners of the mouth should go down." It was every afternoon at 5 o'clock that he would retreat to the tall northwest tower and look on with a scowl. "Look at that king running right out there in front of the townsfolk," he'd complain. "Look at his crown bouncing up and down on his head. Look at his beard flapping in the breeze. I must do something about this," Lord Droon would say. And one day, he did. One Wednesday evening, just before supper, when he thought the king was out, Lord Droon crept to the tall stilt closet in the castle's front hallway. The guards were all dozing in their posts. It took but a moment. He had the king's stilts. He ran down the stairs, down to the furnace to burn them. But before he got there, he heard the sound of happy whistling. The king. He tried to stuff the stilts under his tall, dark robe, but they were too long. They stuck out at the top and the bottom. So he turned and he ran up the stairs. But the king was getting closer and closer, and the stilts were banging against his knees. Then he spotted a window. He looked out. A small boy was passing. "You," said Lord Droon. It was Eric, the page boy. "Yes, sir," he said. "Take these," said Lord Droon, and he thrust the stilts out the window. "Take them down to the edge of town and bury them where no one will ever find them." "The king's stilts? Bury them? But it will spoil all of His Majesty's fun," said Eric. "You impudent boy," said Lord Droon. "I said take those stilts and bury them. And what's more, never come back to this castle. I'll have no impudent boys around here." "But I'm the king's own page boy," said Eric. "You were the king's own page boy," said Lord Droon, and he slammed the window shut. Never before had Eric been so confused, but he didn't dare disobey the command, so reluctantly he took the stilts to the far edge of town. It was the hour when all of the townsfolk were having supper, so no one saw him dig the deep hole. No one saw him bury the stilts. The next evening at 5 o'clock, the king's voice rang through the castle. "Droon, Droon, they're gone!" Lord Droon had expected this, and he had prepared a lie. "It was the townsfolk who did it, Your Majesty," he said as he peered into the empty stilt closet. "I've seen them every day, plotting behind the castle walls. A grown-up king should never run on stilts, they say. He should sit with pomp and dignity upon his throne. It's a shame, Your Majesty, but